but you're learning in spite of the system in some ways. Not to say that things haven't changed, because they have, but it's a little concerning to me that you don't realize that you stand on the you stand on the shoulders of people your age who changed this country 40 years ago, and they haven't told you about that. So,
In the civil rights movement.
well, it's not just the civil rights movement. There was the environmental movement. There was a whole movement around, we need to write our own curriculums here because these faculty are not really teaching us the kind of history we need to know. They're not teaching us the economics we need to know. So you have a whole ferment in colleges and universities where they were challenging what they were being taught, what the course content was. So you had sort of educational reform of a sort. And then you had a lot of economic kinds of issues that began to be challenged. The Great Boycott is one, and my kid never knew what a grape was until, I don't know. Well, that's all about economics. It's not about just some great leader, Cesar Chavez, leading, some farm workers. This is about economics and how the whole farm industry in this country depended on cheap labor. Otherwise, they weren't going to be able to make it. And so now, when the farm workers unionized, what did they do with their big farms and ranches? They went south, they went to Mexico. Because they can get cheap labor over there. So we have an economic system that depends on cheap labor. So there was all this ferment in universities about, why don't you teach us that kind of economics? Because we are the ones who have to deal with it. You are the ones who are going to have to deal with it. So there was this kind of change that young people did, all really through a lot of structures. And some of it's still there. We did integrate not just politics in this country to a degree. We attempted to integrate schools, and there is more. There's more diversity in student bodies today. There is somewhat more diversity among faculty, although we're lagging behind on that. There's like 0.01% of the PhDs in this country are Native American. Why? Who's teaching that history to people? The real history of Native Americans. It's something like 0.5% of PhDs are Hispanic. And I think African Americans are probably 7, 8, 10, something like that. That plays a big role in your education in terms of you being able to hear from people who came from these cultures and have that perspective. That means you just have to work harder at sort of relearning when you leave your book education to go into real life. So I'm just going to kind of leave that with you, and it's because of the time. And I'll take questions.
I have a question about your college experience. When you were saying like how the universities wouldn't, like the Catholic universities wouldn't allow them, like they wouldn't go into your movement, like they wouldn't work with you. Was that because they didn't want their students having free thought, like to be independent, to think any other way than what they were being taught?
Partly, I think there was a lot of fear operating among the nuns that there's these new waves of things out there. Of course, you did have a lot of social change going on. You had this rock and roll coming in.
Yeah.
That's pretty terrible. And you had
LSC. LSC.
And then you had these things coming in that were threats. And so to open the door a crack might be that the doors would just get slammed open. And what would the nuns do?
Is it that they didn't want to lose the old customs of what they were taught? They want to keep that going.
I don't know if you have any comment on this, but it seems to me it's more like, we understand, it is we who understand religion and you who have to learn it from us. You are not the church. And we in YCS were saying, you're the church. It's the clergy's job to be there to support you as you need it. But you're the church, and if you're not the church, we don't have a church. Mother Teresa said, I mentioned this yesterday, it is easier to deal with the poor in the third world than it is to deal with people in the United States because they have no spirituality. We are are the most church-going, one of the most church-going nations in the West, probably in the world. And she said that, we have no spirituality here. And in a sense, that's YCS's whole, I mean, it's just my prayer that we can, maybe in this new time, begin to see more YCS kind of things going on to renew the church, because, that was their theory. They were the church and we were to learn from them.
The rule of communism, I mean, it's hard to exaggerate that. How the church was afraid of communism, atheistic communism. Our YCS in LA was disbanded because our main moderator, John Cofield, at a conference in Idlewild, spoke against the right to work laws. These were laws that would undercut unions. And the cardinal there banned him. He exiled him. He finally ended up here in Chicago. Got an MSW while he was exiled. And the whole YCS movement was because that was a step toward communism, and you're talking against industry's ability to work. So that was a very strong
We had a
feeling
church
within
that
the
was
church.
really under threat, a church that was threatened by all the new lifestyles, like the youth culture that was coming up, the flower children, pot, things like this. And then on the other hand, threatened by the communism movement. So it was, but sort of in the middle of that, we had John the 23rd, this Pope that just threw open windows in the Vatican and just was, again, one of the, as a person, so I didn't grow up or go through YCS thinking that we're just sort of odd people out, we really don't belong to the church, because here was a Pope that said, yes, you do. Yes, you do. And he stands on the shoulder of who wrote Rerum Novarum, was it Pius XII? Leo
the
XIII, who said, as Catholics, we're not supposed to just be doing acts of charity. This is the man who said this back in, what was this,
1895.
1895. We're not supposed to be just doing acts of charity here. We're supposed to be changing society.